The movie Homefront follows the story of a former undercover agent, played by Jason Statham, who moves to a small town with his daughter to start a new life and escape his troubled past. However, things quickly take a turn for the worse when he finds himself at odds with a local drug dealer. His past comes to haunt him as he tries to save himself and his family. The movie begins when a group of bikers enters a bar and make their way to a secret laboratory in the back. Dalton receives a call and informs the group that the plane is fueled and ready to go. The leader of the gang, Danny, orders them to pack up. In the meantime, the DEA shuts off the power before raiding the bar. They engage in a fierce firefight with the bikers. During the chaos, Dalton fights against the gang members and Danny realizes that Dalton is a traitor. Danny and his son attempt to escape in a car with Dalton in pursuit, but they are forced to turn around due to a roadblock. Dalton slides off his bike and fires shots, dragging Danny out of the car and pinning him to the ground. Danny's son doesn't drop his weapon, prompting Dalton to shoot him in the knee. Danny's son then threatens the police and pretends to reach for a gun, causing the officers to open fire. As Danny is taken away, he threatens to harm Dalton and his family. 2 years after, Dalton's daughter Maddie is playing in the schoolyard when a larger child takes her hat. After requesting it back, the bully shoves her to the ground. Maddie quickly gets up and hits the bully in the nose. When Dalton arrives to pick her up from school, the bully's mother Cassie somehow believes her son was wronged and verbally attacks Dalton. The school psychologist reassures Dalton that Maddie is a good girl and asks about their move to a remote town. In the parking lot, Cassie convinces her husband Jimmy to take action. He begins insulting Maddie, and when Dalton turns his back, Jimmy tries to hit him. However, Dalton quickly takes him down, further humiliating him. As they leave, Cassie glares at Dalton from their truck and calls her husband a coward. He claims to have lost his balance, and their son supports his statement by saying he also tripped. Cassie's brother Gator pays a visit to some local teenage drug users and threatens them to stop cooking in his territory. When he returns home, Cassie urges him to teach Dalton a lesson and asks for some drugs. The following day, the psychologist advises Dalton to make amends since grudges are common in their town. Dalton goes to the dock and apologizes to Jimmy for the trouble he and Maddie caused for them. Later at a gas station, two of Gator's henchmen attempt to intimidate Dalton. He warns them that they're making a mistake and suggests they reconsider their actions. Despite his warning, one of them tries to grab his hand, prompting him to strike the man's head against the glass and knock down the other henchman with kicks and punches. After the altercation, Dalton demands to know who sent them, but they remain silent. While Gator is in his lab cooking, he receives a call from his henchmen, who failed their mission. He decides to go to Dalton's place himself, and when they go for a horse ride, Gator slashes a tire and sneaks into the house. He steals Maddie's toy rabbit and discovers a basement filled with files. Realizing that Dalton is an ex-DEA agent, Gator also takes their cat before leaving. In the evening, Maddie is distressed when she cannot find the cat. Dalton goes searching for the cat and finds the slashed tire and the rabbit's decapitated head. Meanwhile, Gator reads the files he stole and learns about the gang Dalton infiltrated. He calls Cheryl and asks her to come over the following morning. Dalton goes to threaten the bewildered Jimmy again, thinking he was responsible. Meanwhile, Gator and Cheryl deduce that Dalton is likely hiding in the town and devise a plan to hand him over to the gang in exchange for their distribution network. However, Cheryl is hesitant due to her contact in the gang being a creepy individual. Dalton gets his daughter a new rabbit, and they discuss her upcoming birthday. They decide to invite her whole class to the party to smooth things over. Meanwhile, Cheryl goes to see the gang leader's lawyer and gives him the stolen file, presenting it as a gift. The lawyer then goes to Danny, the gang leader who still holds a grudge against the man he believes caused his son's death. He tells the lawyer to handle it. At school, Maddie invites her bully to the party. Cassie is taken aback, but ultimately leaves the decision to her son, who accepts the invitation. Tito arrives with planks to replace their worn-out stairs and mentions hearing about the incident with the bully and his father. Dalton dismisses it, saying that they've already made up. Tito doubts this, warning that it never goes away that easily. Dalton shares that someone broke into their home, but Tito says it couldn't have been Jimmy, who doesn't have the guts for that. However, it could have been Gator, Cassie's brother, who he heard was cooking dope. Tito warns Dalton to be careful since the word is out about Gator's activities. Later that day, the children gather to sing Happy Birthday to Maddie, and the once bully seems to have opened up a bit. Cassie later picks him up and things appear to have worked out between them. Meanwhile, Cheryl meets up with Cyrus from the biker gang to discuss the details. He questions what she has to gain from the arrangement, and she divulges the distribution plan. However, Cyrus doesn't confirm their deal and instead asks for Dalton's whereabouts. Gator visits his sister to warn her to stay away from Dalton. She asks if he managed to bring any drugs with him, but he admits he didn't, causing her to lose her temper, and they begin shouting at each other. Meanwhile, her son overhears everything. As Gator leaves, Jimmy asks him not to provide her with drugs anymore as she is falling apart. Dalton receives a call from a DEA agent who has obtained the information he requested. The agent reveals Gator's criminal history, as well as Cheryl's ties to a biker gang and their presence in the town, all of which come as a surprise to Dalton. The next morning, Dalton heads to the restaurant that Tito had mentioned to have a conversation with Gator. He warns Gator to stop messing with them, but Gator plays dumb. Later, Dalton receives a picture of Cheryl and realizes he might be in trouble. Meanwhile, Dalton scopes out Gator's boathouse and finds a hidden lab containing packages of a white substance, confirming that Gator is involved in illegal activity. Dalton drills holes in the light bulbs and fills them with fuel, setting the rest of the cans on the table as a warning. As he leaves, he finds his cat, but one of Gator's goons discovers him. Dalton takes care of him and retrieves the cat, but another goon knocks him out. When he wakes up, he is being tortured by the guys from the gas station incident. They enjoy beating him up, drowning him and threatening his daughter. However, Dalton fights back, headbutting one of them, breaking another's ankle, kicking him into the water and freeing his tied-up hands before beating off the rest of them. When the guy who threatened his daughter tries to escape, Dalton sends him to sleep with the fishes and leaves with his cat. Dalton arrives home after the confrontation with Gator and his goons, but his daughter Maddie is confused about why they suddenly need to leave. Dalton tries to reassure her that everything is fine, but he can tell that she is still worried. As they pack up their belongings, the biker gang arrives at their doorstep. Gator offers to draw them a map to their destination, and Cyrus suggests that they take a boat to get there. However, Gator starts getting cold feet and tells the gang that he won't be going with them. He's worried that he'll be the #1 suspect if anything goes wrong, so he decides to stay in a public place when it all goes down. Cyrus takes Cheryl with him instead, and Gator heads into town to make sure the sheriff sees him before going to a local bar. Meanwhile, Dalton has asked for Tito's help to move the horses. When the biker gang reaches the shore, they hear strange noises coming from the stables. Cyrus sends one of his men to investigate, and he heads to the stables with his gun at the ready. Tito ambushes him and they start fighting, rolling around on the ground and exchanging blows. The man manages to knock Tito down and goes for his gun, but Tito impales him with a pitchfork before he can use it. Tito rushes to his car and starts spamming his horn, alerting Dalton to the incoming men. But before he can do anything, he is shot point blank. Dalton knows that they're in for a fight. He switches the lights off and tells Maddie to hide in the basement and call 911. He pulls out a shotty and waits. The first man enters the door and gets blown to bits, but Maddie makes a sound and is heard. A man starts breaking through the wood to get to Maddie. Dalton starts shooting his shotty at multiple men and even use one as a shield. Maddie gets spooked and goes running into the woods. Dalton sees this but is unable to follow from Cyrus firing an array of bullets. Eventually he manages to hit Cyrus and starts chasing down the man following Maddie. The man ends up catching up to her and aims his gun, but Dalton shows up at the right time and ends him. They stare at each other thinking it's all over, but Cyrus tackles Dalton. He tells Maddie to keep running where she reaches the dock and asks Cheryl for help. Dalton then has a fierce one-on-one combat with Cyrus. Dalton learned a few lessons from the Connor and Khabib fight as he manages to ground and pound Cyrus. But Cyrus then cheats by taking out a knife. As Dalton dodges his attacks, he gets him to the ground. He puts him in an armbar and there's no tapping out in this scenario, and so Dalton dislocates Cyrus's arm lock and uses his own dead arm to stab himself repeatedly. In the meantime, Cheryl panics and locks Maddie on the boat and speeds off. An army of police then arrive, and Dalton quickly states the situation. Tito then somehow arrives and is barely alive, but Dalton tells him he'll be alright. Maddie still has the phone from before and calls the police. They then put Dalton on the line. He tells her she's going to be alright, and as she pulls into the boathouse, she tells her dad and then loses connection. He runs into a cop car and starts flying to the location. Cheryl tries to get Maddie out the boat, but Maddie stabs her when she touches her. Gator arrives at his boathouse not knowing what is going on. When Cheryl tells him what happened and that she brought the kid with her, he loses his shit. He calls her mentally ill that she brought a witness from a shootout over to their drug lab. He clocks the gun to take care of it as he's swearing at Cheryl's stupidity. Luckily, Cassie pulls up to the house with Jimmy and asks Gator if he had anything to do with the shootings and missing child. He acts dumb and tells Jimmy to take her home. Cassie is not buying it and feels that Gator is lying. Meanwhile, Cheryl takes Maddie out of the boat and is trying to help her so Gator doesn't kill her, but Maddie starts screaming and both Gator and Cassie hear. When Cassie goes inside, she turns the lights on, which triggers the trap Dalton set from before. As his boathouse sets up in flames, he turns around to see Cassie protecting Maddie. He tells her to hand Maddie over and they have a fight with each other. We hear a gunshot, and we see Gator holding a gun in hand and that Cassie is bleeding out. He throws Maddie in the car and takes off while Dalton is pulling up. The house completely explodes in an amazing scene where Dalton turns the car around and follows pursuit. Going from road to terrain, the cops are also in pursuit, and so they begin closing a bridge. And while Gator makes it, Dalton's car flips over. Gator stops his car and with pistol in hand walks towards Dalton. Maddie then pleads Gator to stop what he is doing. This gives Dalton enough time to grab Gator and disarm him. Dalton shows absolutely no mercy and beats the living hell out of Gator. He keeps going on until he puts a pistol to Gator's head. He sees his daughter watching with horror and tells Gator that she just saved his life. In the last few scenes, we see that Cassie is injured but will survive. Cheryl, on the other hand, is taken into custody. The movie ends with Dalton going to prison to see Danny. His exact words are, "See you outside, Danny. I'll be waiting." Thank you all for watching the complete video. I would greatly love your support with a like and subscribe. See you on the next one.